started. As I mentioned, this is our fourth episode of the Semantic Exchange. This is a webinar series that we've started to provide kind of an interactive space for people to ask questions of our semantic design experts. So we're centering it around pieces of thought leadership that our different experts have written and published on the knowledge base of enterprise knowledge. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, please do so. It's just ripe with so many pieces of content around semantics, taxonomy, ontology, knowledge management, artificial intelligence, and more. There's a lot of great stuff there for you to check out. So again, this is a chance to kind of deep dive on one of those pieces and actually pick the brain of someone who was involved with the work or involved with writing the thought leadership piece itself. So we will take sort of a Q&A format. When the time is right, we'll open it up for questions and encourage you to ask whatever questions you have. Before we dive into that, Yumiko, who is our guest for today, she's a taxonomy consultant with enterprise knowledge, has extensive experience doing taxonomy design in complex environments. She'll be reviewing a piece with you today about our work in the financial services space and going into semantic layer there. So she'll give us an overview of the case study, and then we'll go into questions. So with that, I think we are ready to hear from Yumiko.
Thank you, Sarah May. All right. Well, so for the past couple of years, we have been engaged with a multinational bank. One of the things that we were looking to do was to improve their risk assessment process. So what this means is that the firm itself needs to establish and maintain a risk management framework that supports risk identification, measurement, monitoring, escalation, mitigation processes. All of these need to be done not only across the firm, but also through its subsidiaries. And this is also a global enterprise. So there are a lot of places where this needs to come into play. When we talk about these types of risks, they are concerned with things that might potentially be economic or reputational risks, regulatory risks, financial reporting risks that could impact their clients. So example, if a firm is unable to operate due to a natural disaster, like that's a risk that they need to prepare for and identify ways to mitigate. So there are a lot of challenges with this because, as you can imagine, this is a very large enterprise. It's a financial firm. There's a lot of regulatory requirements and reporting requirements that are involved. And there are a lot of, there's just a lot of potential issues that could possibly arise. So one of the first problems that we had was that even though we're talking about a specific area within the firm that deals with risks, there is a very large ecosystem of applications that exists to support this risk management framework. So as you can imagine, which is also very common through other entities, that there was a lack of consistent terminology across the firm. So for example, you might call something cyber crimes where another source might call it a data breach. So there's a very typical scenario where groups were using different terminology. And if you don't have a consistent way of naming things, then it isn't really difficult to connect that information across different platforms or applications. Another issue that they faced was that a lot of this data, like I mentioned, wasn't centralized. They have a lot of different applications within the framework that are very specific to a specific piece of the risk management. So it was really hard to get a holistic view of the data when those systems aren't integrated and when they're not communicating well with each other. So employees needed to we needed to provide the employees a way to aggregate this data for reporting and to make it easier and less time consuming for them to get the information that they were looking for. Another problem that they had was that risk management, like I mentioned, is very complex. It is not straightforward. There is a lot that goes into it. I won't bore you with the details, but even for people who work in the field, they needed a more intuitive way to be able to interact and understand the information that they were creating and capturing and generating through this process. So with those challenges in mind, EK came to the table and we came up with a couple of different solutions to help them mitigate the problems that they were facing. One of the first things was to provide a standardized categorization structure. So we ended up creating consistent ways to classify data. So through controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, to support the framework and that were needed to be able to support the framework and also join these different systems together. One of the biggest challenges that we faced was that the way that they were describing their risks were kind of wild and free. So they originally had over 21,000 free-form text fields to describe their risks. Trying to navigate through 21,000 potential risks is very challenging. And so we came up with a solution that we were able to reduce that to around 1,800. I'll go into details a little bit later about how that was actually accomplished. And one of the other things that we noticed is that there was no centralized taxonomies for some firm-wide concepts that needed to be included. So one being a product taxonomy. So we were able to create a product taxonomy, and we were able to develop category foundations that were able to be expanded and utilized not only for NFR or the risk framework that we were working in, but also for other use cases within the firm. So it was a solution that really helped with this risk framework, but it also provided more value to different organizations within the firm. The next step, once we had all those categories and taxonomies created, it's like, great, we have a standardized way of describing things. All of our systems can start utilizing this common language. But then the next step is actually then being able to create relationships between these different concepts so that you can start to infer some information and gather some data from it. So this is where we implemented an ontology and a knowledge graph. So there were some existing ontologies. There was different knowledge graphs that existed within the firm, but we really had to enhance some of the existing ones. And then we actually created a new knowledge graph for this specific use case to support this data. So the knowledge graph served as a central repository where the taxonomy management system, data from the different applications could be captured and joined together to get a more holistic view of the risk environment for the firm. And then on top of the taxonomies, which we built, this ontologies and knowledge graphs on top of the taxonomies and with the taxonomies, then we ended up developing some consumer grade capabilities to help our users with this data. So there were a suite of consumer grade capabilities designed to make interacting with the data more intuitive, provide easier way to get reporting, easier way to drive analytics, and also support things such as recommendation engines and notification services. We are able to also integrate with some different third-party softwares to help create more of a user-friendly view of the taxonomies and ontologies. So people could look at how these what they call categories, how they were organized, and then actually get a view as to what the relationships were between this data and create dashboards that provided more information that was very specific to their needs, all without having to go into all these different systems in order to get that information. So we kind of like created a one-stop shop to be able to find a lot of the detailed information and data needs. Supporting all of this, what was going on was basically the semantic architecture. It was imperative to strengthen the connections between the existing tools and technologies. We had to implement APIs. We had to integrate visualization tools, establish governance and change management capabilities to get all of this running in a smooth fashion. So there was a lot of work that went into it, but we ended up doing a great work with this. Overall, we were able to create 11 new taxonomies, or sorry, no, 7 new taxonomies. 4 of them were in existence, but we were able to develop 7 net new for this project, some of which were then utilized across different areas within the firm. The knowledge graph was able to connect 3 applications that were in existence, and we're adding new applications to the knowledge graph as the project matures. The ontology and knowledge graph provided a centralized and interconnected view of risk information. All of this was able to happen without having to migrate data, which is very important. There was new functionality that was built upon this connected data to provide enhanced search capabilities, knowledge panels, reporting dashboards, data visualization, as I mentioned again. And overall, this created a seamless integration and operability across the organization's knowledge management infrastructure. And this really maximizes the value of their data that they have, and streamlined a lot of the work that they had to do for this work. So that's kind of a high-level summary of the work that we did and how. And then next, I want to jump into kind of a little lighthearted comparison as to why all of this matters. So semantics matter, and integration matters. Let me just get to a screen where I can see things a little bit more clearly for myself. So take a real life scenario. We have Fred, Jerry, and Susan. They each were going to have these individual parties on the 4th of July. They found out they were each going to have a party, and they decided they wanted to combine it into one huge party. So they sent out their invites to their friends saying 4th of July barbecue, here's the location, it's at 11 o'clock. So what are the potential problems with this? One is siloed data. Information from one event planning did not necessarily make its way to the other event, the joined event. So maybe Fred was planning on having a pool party, but the location at Jerry's house actually doesn't have a pool. So then someone shows up and they are not dressed appropriately because, hey, guess what? There's no pool. The relationships between data is important. How things should or should not be connected really will impact the quality of results that you get out from the data and those relationships. So in this case, maybe some people aren't good at parties together. Maybe some people should be at parties together. Maybe they get along really well. Maybe kids and pets aren't going to be a great combination at a party. So the different types of relationships that exist between data or entities really needs to keep into consideration. Data continuity. So, I mean, one could assume that they meant AM, but maybe that meant PM. So you want to ensure that there is consistent data, consistent information to reduce confusion. You don't want people showing up late. And then authoritative data sources are also really important as well. You can't have each application saying that they have the authoritative data source, because then that means that nobody is actually the authoritative data source. So you want to be able to you want to be able to identify the authoritative data sources, and in this case, identify who's bringing the potato salad, so that you don't have an influx of potato salad, basically. You don't want to have an influx of pseudo authoritative sources. You want to make sure that you're capturing accurate data. So that is my overview. And now we can jump to any questions we may have.
Yeah, thanks, Yumiko. For those in the room, in the virtual room, please feel free to drop any questions you have into the Q&A, and we'll go through those, and happy to hear whatever questions you have for us. Yumiko, I'll start off by kind of saying I don't know that an influx of potato salads would be something I'd consider to be a problem, but yeah. And I would like for you to just say a little bit about like what your role in that work was. You know, you were
Sure.
centered as a taxonomist, so if you just want to talk briefly about that.
Yeah, so as a taxonomist, I was kind of at the beginning stages of this, where we were really trying to identify what vocabularies were needed to drive this project going forward. What were the important vocabularies? So we have vocabularies that described and categorized risks at a high level. We have categories that describe different processes. But then there is other areas in the firm that there wasn't a lot of agreement or consistency on how they were really describing things. So one area might call a group of people that work in the same area as a business unit. Others might call it a department. Others might call it a division. Others might call it a line of business. So we really had to identify what the best way to describe those group of people are, so that we could assign them to specific risks. So if we want to say, you know, if there is a cybersecurity breach, that is a problem that's going to probably affect the technology teams. So what was the best source of data to use to describe how technology was organized within the organization? So a lot of it was identifying if there was any internal existing taxonomies or categorization models that we could utilize, and we could adopt as categories to help drive this. The other part of it was identifying any new types of categories that we were going to need. One way of doing that was to look at the systems that were being utilized in the current state of the company to manage this risk framework. How were they describing risks? What were they using to tag data? So we're able to extrapolate some categories from existing systems. And so we came up with basically like a framework taxonomy, to help drive this. It was kind of like our first implementable version of a taxonomy that we were able to then share with stakeholders. Once they got a view of like what the risks look like, how the system was going to be, how they were going to be interacting with the system, that's when they started coming to the table and saying, well, I would really like to be able to describe a risk with product, which is where we're like, oh, well, we need a product taxonomy. And so that started that investigation all over again. Is there a product taxonomy that exists? Do we need to create something new? So those were that's a lot of the work that we did, was identification of the key values that were needed, identification of existing vocabularies that we could adopt and standardize, or maybe creating things net new.
Yeah, and I think there's another really interesting part of the story, which is you mentioned that this client had over 20,000 sort of unstandardized, free text kind of risks, and you were able to whittle that down to under 2,000. Can you talk a little bit about the approaches there? I think there's some really great ways that you're interacting with like the data science folks as a taxonomist,
Yes.
things along those lines. I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we really started utilizing our data science partners at EK to help with this project. They were actually able to create a large language model that looked at commonalities among those 21,000 risks. And the large language model then was able to create basically a starter set of risks from those 21,000. So they looked at the 21,000, the large language model said, well, these are all kind of similar. Let's rewrite this to like a more generic, standardized risk. And that really whittled it down a lot to those at the time that the article was written, it was 1,100. And then there was a human in the loop process with that as well, right? We're not automatically going to assume that the large language model was creating everything completely accurately. So we had many, many people help review those risks, determine if they were correct or not. Like some of them, maybe they were junk and we got rid of them. Some of them like approved, perfect, let's just use it. Some others, we needed to edit them. But it gave us a really clean slate to start with, rather than these crazy 21,000 free text risks that they had been working with. And they've grown since then through contributions. But you also mentioning our data science team and taxonomy. I mean, we've actually been able to incorporate a lot of AI and machine learning to help with the taxonomy process. So over these risks, 1,100 is still a lot to work with. It's, there's no way one person can look through all of those and determine if what they are looking for already exists. This is a process continually evolving. So we have people that are requesting to add new risks to this taxonomy that's already over at this point, 1,800 terms long now. So our data science team was able to come up with an ML model that was able to basically do a similarity analysis. So if someone requested a new risk to be added, the model would go through and say, well, actually, this risk already really looks like this risk that already exists. So we can prevent any duplication with such a huge number of terms that are in place. Super
Absolutely.
helpful so that we don't have to do that manually.
Yeah. Well, I love to hear where AI is helping us to kind of streamline some of the more painful manual governance change management processes. Great. So we have, I think, time for maybe one more question before we close out for today. So there's one from the audience here that I'll share. Looking to validate understanding. So you mentioned that working with this customer, you realize that different departments operate with essentially the same set of business concepts, but each is using them differently. So did you start with terminology harmonization, developing a mutually agreed business vocabulary? Was part of your work focused on resolving differences and how different groups use the same or similar terms in varied contexts?
Yes. So using the example of, I mentioned the example of, some people were using the term business units, other people were using terms like divisions, other people were using terms like line of businesses. These actually originate from different data sources that already existed within the firm. We have a finance team that manages kind of like staffing. So there's like an LDAP system that lists who all the employees are, what department they work in, which division that they work in. So there's their construct that existed for like organizations in that aspect. But then there's a different categorization model that existed within, I'm sorry, that one was HR. Then there was a different construct that's focused more towards how the money is flowing in the company. So they have kind of a different model of how these groups within the firm are organized. So they call, the lines of businesses that they have. And that was focused more on how that's kind of like a more finance view of how things were structured. So we had these different people utilizing business units. We had people utilizing lines of businesses. They were very similar and in some aspects overlap, but we needed to get some sort of commonality and we needed to start on a common ground to make sure that everybody was speaking the same language and understanding the data in the same way, but also so that the data was being represented the same. So it's asking a lot sometimes to ask people to change some of their data or change how they view things. But it was a lot of going to these different business partners and reviewing the problem that we're facing. So we would go to them and say, hey, we have these two different concepts here. They're kind of the same thing. We need to align on one of them. And then have the discussion of what is going to work best, so that they were a part of the conversation. They were a part of the decision. We weren't really forcing anything onto them. they were a part of the constructive criticism that made the decision, so that we could align on a singular category to help drive things forward.
That's great. Thank you, Yumiko. So yeah, I understand, as AI is becoming more infused into how we as semantic designers work, you gave some great examples in terms of similarity analysis, et cetera. These kinds of conversations will be more important for us, or we'll have more time to be able to focus on the brokering of meaning, and those kind of more complex questions that arise where you need that human touch to sort of get to alignment, and help progress things forward. So thank you, Yumiko, for that. We are just about at time. So there was one thing I wanted to share with you all before we close out. If we could pull up our slide. Enterprise Knowledge is hosting our second annual Semantic Layer Symposium. So we wanted to share this invitation with you all. I think many of you who are joining us maybe also be interested. So this is a great opportunity to be in the room with like-minded individuals who are, working to answer some of these same questions or have great examples of how they've solved similar problems. So we'll be this year in Copenhagen. Last year proved to be a really rich experience, so we're excited to bring this again this year. It is September 30th and September 30th and October 1st. We'll start off with a hands-on sort of day-long workshop experience, and then the conference talks will be on October 1st. If you're interested, you can register with us, and we're also including a discount code for the people who are joining us today, in appreciation for your engagement here. So again, thanks for your time today. Yumiko, thank you for sharing your time with us and your expertise with us. We will be sharing these recordings as well, so you can refer back to them in the future. And that's another episode of the Semantic Exchange in the books. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.